China's improved awareness is reflected in its fiction, especially in the works of female writers who boldly tackle this alongside wider humanist concerns. One thing that I have really enjoyed about putting this collection together has been the way horror plays with perspective and voice. And there is certainly a vast array in this book, from conventional omniscient narrators and intimate first-person storytelling to an unusual second-person viewpoint and the marginalized voices of the non-human and non-mortal. There are neurodivergent characters, and those who are being deliberately misled or manipulated, and sometimes a combination of these, suddenly rapidly switching, which make the stories all the more interesting. Whilst the styles and tones vary from story to story, from literary to journal-like reportage, from grave voices of gravitas to the darkly comical, each of them has a sense of the uncanny, with themes of entrapment, secrecy, and concealment running through them. I truly believe that many of these stories can be read as archetypes for the Chinese Gothic. The last few years seem to have thrown even more darkness into our everyday lives. I sat, a few years ago, feeling surreal whilst translating zombie sci-fi during a tide of infections and lockdowns, and working through this anthology whilst myself becoming infected with COVID added a horrific dimension to the project. Not only are we dealing with a general collapse of society amidst a worldwide health crisis, and wars and conflict on every front, but also a seeming return to old lines of hatred along race, sexuality, and gender. To some extent, horror literature helps us work through bad experiences and trauma. Experiencing frightening stories in fiction and emerging from them, relatively unscathed, gives us hope and helps us think about our own suffering in a wider context. Whilst they are not meant to be a panacea, they do help to move us towards new courage and towards healing. I am writing this introduction during Halloween, a time when we set up an elaborate space of themed horror fantasy to give the local children the most memorable trick or treat, depending on how they see it. I have only recently started to appreciate their faces lighting up with not only fear, but also excitement, and then joy. And I can think of no better way to consider how horror can bring a renewed sense of life, as well as fear and reflection. You may notice that I wrote relatively unscathed. You may think you are going to listen to this book, and when you finish, you will calmly put it down and get on with your lives. But I hope that as the curator of this collection, it will change you a little along the way. Whether it's a moment's hesitation before you step out on the balcony, or the speed with which you slam the book down after the last twist, I hope that some of it will stay with you for a very, very long time.